Welcome to Authenticity Unleashed. I'm your host, Pam Rader, and today I have an extraordinary guest, someone who is becoming a dear friend of mine, someone who I have great respect for, and who's walking a really inspiring journey that I'm excited to share with you all. Welcome to Alex Vigue. Great to have you here, Alex.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So Alex is the co host of the very popular Let's Not Sugarcoat It podcast. Her and her co host Bella talk about all things in reality, the reality of raising kids, the reality of being in a family, and trying to navigate this crazy thing called life. So it's a really great complement to Authenticity Unleashed because it's kind of along the same vein, and we have a lot in common. Now, Alex and I just had the pleasure of doing a talk together. And this talk was called The Faces of Addiction, a Conversation That Matters. And we had four different presenters who were presenting things about addiction from the different perspectives. Me as the mother and a wife, Alex as someone who is in recovery, and we had Luke and Doria, who are also guests on this podcast. You can go back and search their episodes. And I was astounded by the perspective that you brought, Alex, because for all of you who don't know, Alex traveling a journey of sobriety. Her handle on Instagram is on the other side of the bottle. She's
Mhm.
exploring this journey of sober living, and we'll get into that a little bit. But what shocked me about how you presented this perspective, she said she was going to talk about de-stigmatizing addiction. And I was like, cool. But I immediately went to that you'd be destigmatizing it for you, but you didn't. You went to bat for those who can't defend themselves. And that told me so much about who you are as a person and why I feel so inspired by you and why I feel deeply connected to you, because I can tell that you're such a heart led person. And I would love, Alex, if you would share a little bit of your story, your journey, and then I'd love to talk about destigmatizing, not just addiction, lots of things. So
Okay, let's do
I'll
it.
hand it over to you. Tell us
Okay.
a little bit about your journey.
My journey in general. Well, yeah, I mean, with alcohol, my journey started out, much like most people who maybe walk the toxic path of the relationship that I ended up with alcohol. But I remember I was writing a chapter recently. I started drinking one day, grade nine, looked over some guys doing a keg stand, and it's like drunk Alex was born in that moment. And there was this thing that happened. I just felt this sense of belonging. And then I just went on to just drink at various points in my life. And I always was able to chalk it up to a phase, right? Binge drank in university, but I felt like so did everybody else. I entered the mummy wine culture pretty fast and furious when that happened. And then it just somewhere along the way, it turned from being something I did for fun and to feel this sense of freedom to being something I did to escape. And then it just took a spiral down and it became a bit reckless. And I know I've shared this before, where I shared it at a talk, but I ended up in a drunken argument with my husband and I hit him and I got arrested. And, of course, that didn't seem like I was able to blame everybody but me in that moment. And so I didn't quite finish drinking then. And then it kind of took going on a trip with a bunch of friends for me not to be able to hide the fact that, wow, I was really struggling with my relationship with alcohol. And then I was like, I need to stop. So I started exploring all the ways that it showed up in my life. And then that talk that we did, and I don't know when and how you want to dive into that, but it showed me so many places that alcohol had showed up in my life over the last, 2 decades, and how I just thought, oh, there's so much to this, right? There's so many different
Yeah.
phases. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the first thing that I want to presence is nobody wants to be caught in addiction. Nobody wants to, no one intends for that to happen. And I'm curious, you say it took that weekend with your friends, but was there times before that you were questioning, or were you still full on justifying, rationalizing, and defending? Because you said something earlier. You said, well, everybody, I binge drank in college, but everybody did it. And I think that's a big thing that we do, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody does it. So it's fine. So were you like in your mind thinking I might have a problem, or did it really take all of this coming to a head for you to confront that?
Okay, yeah. So I truly believe that nobody gets to the point that I got to with not ever questioning my drinking. Like I definitely, and maybe that's a blanket statement, but I definitely questioned it. I even questioned it. I knew that when I got drunk, sometimes I would take it too far. And I could tell that I took it sometimes further than other people. And then I just somewhere in adulthood, when I wasn't drinking every day, I started doing this thing that, in the sober community, a lot of people talk about this, where it's like I compared my drinking to other people. I looked at what I knew, I compared it to other people, but I definitely had moments when I thought it. In COVID, right before COVID, I had taken 80 days off drinking. It started as a 30-day challenge because I knew that my drinking was kind of out of control, but I didn't use those words. It's like I knew that, I drank a lot and I could drink a lot. And so, yeah, I did question it. I'd questioned it many times before,
Right.
for sure.
I think it's difficult though, because our culture is so ingrained in alcohol culture, alcohol soaked culture. As I get a little bit older, there's more conversation about, respecting people's boundaries, including sober living in our social kind of environments. But really and truly, alcohol is just everywhere. And I think that a lot of people use alcohol to cope, and they defend their right to do so. And when you quit or you stop for a period of time, it forces other people to confront their own inner demons.
Yeah, and people don't like that. I know that, what's her name? Laura McCowan. She wrote that,
Yeah.
yeah.
She was a Baptiste yoga teacher, you know. She went to
Whoa.
Baptiste yoga with, yeah, and she's got some great books. She's a really interesting gal.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know she talks about that.
Yeah, and she just says that, people, it's like people use, and so does Holly Whitaker. They use your drinking or their drinking or your quitting drinking as their measuring stick, right? And nobody, no, like, and I'm using the nobody in quotations, but even after our event we did, somebody came up to me and asked me, oh, is there a protocol for, when, and it was out of a place of curiosity, but for not uh, drinking around people who have struggled with drinking. And I was like, oh, this is a cool, curious question. And then not but, it also brought up the thought of me of, this is what happens. It's like nobody cares about what's in your glass but you. And I got into this trap as well. When somebody else would quit drinking, I'd think, oh, my drinking isn't as bad as so and so. I didn't do
Mhm.
that, so I must be okay. Right? We
Right.
use other people's drinking, not our own relationship, as the measuring stick.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. It's yeah, I'm not as I think we do this everywhere. When you look at how people get into violent crime, uh, they didn't just pick up a baseball bat and bat somebody out one day. That's not generally how it happens. They start out in environments where maybe they're pushing and shoving on the playground and they get celebrated for it. And then they look and they say, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. I was just defending my best friend. And then someone in their group steals a chocolate bar and they say, well, I'm not as bad as that guy because he steals and I don't. And we use that, like we measure I just think anytime that we have to look at someone else and say, I'm not as bad as that person, we got a fucking problem. And we
Yeah,
should
we
be
gotta,
looking like
yeah.
turn the mirror on yourself. If you say those words, I'm not as bad as, and that's a deflection. It's a
Yes.
deflection. And yeah, I love that. So, and it doesn't really matter what we're talking about, whether it's addiction or it's, we're talking about criticizing people or laziness or anything. But the minute we have that conversation, it's a deflection. It's a
Yeah.
complete deflection. And when we deflect, we delay. So when we deflect, we delay our awakening, because the awakening will come And I always say you can take the tap on the shoulder from the universe, or you can wait for the shovel to the back of your head.
Yeah, I did that with alcohol. I waited till the shovel in the back of my head for sure.
Well, I think a lot of us do, right? A lot of us do. Now, I personally haven't struggled with addiction in my personal being, but my son has traveled a journey through addiction, and I want to say today he's been clean and sober today for 2 years, and we're
I saw that. That's amazing.
celebrating him. Yes, and my son went to treatment 29 times.
Wow.
Everyone gave up on him except for him. He knew there was some fight left in him. There was something in there that kept him going. And it's not hopeless, but we got to stop blaming, pointing fingers, looking outward. It's the moment of truth when we're willing to turn around and say, what's going on in here? When we're willing to
Mhm.
confront our fear and confront our pain and confront our no. Do you think, Alex, that you've got to the place yet where you've really confronted the pain? Because I think drinking's a cover up for pain.
Yeah, I think drinking's a cover for pain for sure. I think I'm at the place where I yeah, I mean, I think so, but I think I have work to do on it still. I think for me drinking was always, or the way it started was, I mean, when I just wrote this chapter, it's like it started, and the minute I could be like drunk Alex, it's like for a second I felt freedom from that feeling of unworthiness that I'd always felt, right? So it's covering up those feelings of feeling unworthy, not enough. And then I was, when I was drinking again later, it was like, yeah, escaping. I just wanted to escape because I was unhappy, because I didn't feel in a happy place, but I had never confronted all those stories I had about myself, right? And it's
Yeah, I'm not
hard.
enough and therefore not worthy. And then when we drink, some of the inhibitions go away and
Mhm.
we step into that character that we wish we had the courage to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think all addiction is about pain. And I'm not talking just about addiction in substances. There are so many addictions nowadays, and there's so many people that don't even recognize. I see constantly in my practice of coaching people coming in complaining about their husbands. It's primarily men with video game addictions,
Oh,
ruining their marriages.
wow.
And it's an escape, you know, and it's an acceptable one, as is alcohol to some degree. And the
Yeah.
more socially acceptable it is, the deeper people get in it before they ever recognize they have a problem.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think it's easier because it's, if it's so acceptable, etc., it's easy to find people to support the narrative that, oh, I don't have a problem. I mean, when I used to say, is my drinking that bad? And then I'd look to people I knew. Of course, I was hanging out with other people who drank, you know, a lot.
Yeah.
And then they could easily say, well, no, you have a job, you do this, you do this, you do this, right? You
Yeah.
can justify it, you can find evidence for whatever you're looking for. And I could easily
Yeah.
find evidence that I didn't have a drinking problem, and people to tell me I didn't either.
Do you know what I've had some spiritual teachers say this to me, that the moment that you're justifying, rationalizing, or defending something, you got a problem in your life, because
Yeah,
the truth does not need defending,
totally. Yeah, I agree.
right?
That
Like the
makes sense.
truth. So, you know, if you're listening right now, just look to the places that you're justifying, rationalizing, or defending any behavior. Maybe how you're being snarky with people, or you're quiet quitting at work, or you're, you know, any of it. But if you're defending it, you're probably not living in truth.
Hmm.
And the
Yeah.
truth is what sets you free. When you come to that moment where you're like, I have a problem with alcohol. If I want to get better, if I want my life to be better, I got to look at me. So
Hmm.
you started this journey, you decided to change your relationship with alcohol. And let's get into this talk, cuz you openly said I was privileged. Like you had a
Hmm.
lot of privilege when you had to confront this journey with your relationship with alcohol. So talk a little bit about that. I loved the story that you told at our talk about how things were skewed in your neighborhood growing up.
Okay, yeah. Well, no, when I started, like when I quit drinking and I started the journey of sobriety, what I like you were saying a second ago, alcohol culture, it's everywhere. So I started looking at it, started thinking of where it showed up in my life. And then I started thinking, huh, I was thought immediately of my friend I had growing up. And she came from this house that was deemed, the wrong side of the tracks. It was called EOA back in London, Ontario. And her mom had died of a drug overdose when we were little, like when we were in elementary school. Her dad, they had five girls in their family. Her dad drank and he had been branded, the alcoholic dad. He couldn't hold down a job. He lived in this house that was more beaten up, and people didn't want to send their kids to my friend's house for play dates. And on the playground, you as a kid, I remember hearing mom say, well, just invite her to your house, or so on and so on and so on. And then it occurred to me when I was like starting this journey of sobriety, how freaking ridiculous it was that in that house everyone's like, oh yeah, he fit a mold of a society's stigma more of what it meant to have a drinking problem. He had trouble holding down a job. He was a blue collar factory worker, like all these things. And then there was my family where my mom and stepdad, they drank a lot. They might have been going to elite golf courses and, country clubs and things, but they drank all the time. And nobody was saying, hey, these kids can't come to this person's house. Right. And I mean, that was more when we were teenagers, but I was like, okay, this is crazy to me. And I thought the
Yeah.
dichotomy of that is insane.
Yeah, you get shit faced at the country club and it's totally fine.
It's
But if
fine.
you don't happen to have the money to do that and you're in your beaten up house getting drunk by yourself, then that's a problem.
Yeah. And
But
that
it's the
is
same
insane.
thing. The only difference is the filter. And when we have privilege, we can put a filter around it.
Yeah, and for some reason, Sistat, I guess, and this was something that I want to be part of the charge of helping to break down, is that it's easier for us to say as a society, and I am generalizing, but to say, oh, that person's fine because they're drinking out of some fancy glass in a fancy home, going with driving their fancy car. So they don't have a problem. They're
Mhm.
just socializing. No, they're drinking a lot.
Yeah.
Just like the guy who's drinking a lot at his house who has less privilege. And
Yeah.
yet he is branded a giant alcoholic, and the other people are branded like high members of society. And I just thought this is unfair.
I love that you're talking about this because, I grew up in a house of my mom didn't drink much, but my dad was a heavy drinker and he never missed a day of work. He always was in a good mood. He had, parties at our house. My dad's a musician and there was parties at our house all the time. And I was around people drinking all the time. And I look back now and I think there was a lot of alcoholism going on in a whole arena. But, my dad used to have an expression that he'd say, like, if you drink like a man, you have to be able to work like a man. And as long as you can get up in the morning and go to work, you're not an alcoholic. And they'd party till 4 in the morning and they would all get up and go to work. So they're all okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know and I look back now and I think this is how I wound up in an abusive alcoholic marriage because I didn't have a radar for that. I just thought a lot of that was normal
Totally.
because it was so normalized. I'm not vilifying any of it. I grew up in the 70s, man. It was all like, it's
It was
like
all party.
I and my parents were great and it's not about that. It's just the perception of it all
Mhm.
and how it skews how we see our own problematic behavior. Now, I want to share with you after the talk, which I just loved. Like I said, that you brought that out. You went to bat for the little people that can't do it for themselves. You didn't say, I don't want people looking at me in a different light. You said, what about like here? I'm standing here taking responsibility for my life, but I'm not going to point the finger at someone who's not as privileged as me who maybe can't do that right now. And that was just like
Thank you.
so extraordinary. And I notice stuff like that about people. It's my favorite quality of people, like kindness like that is so rare. And I did not realize, and I haven't shared this with you, Alex, I don't love to share, like, I don't go and share if I bought somebody a coffee at Starbucks. Like, I hate that shit. But I'm going to share this because I want you to know how moved I was. My son lived on the streets. My son was in a tent, and I have had lots of interaction with people on the streets and lots of compassion. But there came a point where I got sort of compassion fatigue because I had to protect my own heart. I was so distraught about my son and the possibility of his death, really, and I had to start looking away, or I felt like I had to start looking away for a time. Just I couldn't, it was too much for me. And then I don't remember re-engaging, and I realized like I hadn't. And after our talk, I came out of Save on Foods in West Bank, and there was a gentleman sitting there, and he had his backpack sitting out, and he had a milk jug that he had cut open with a box of cereal right in the milk jug and kind of this makeshift spoon, and he was eating the cereal, and he had an iced tea beside him. And I thought, you know what? I have a little money in my pocket. I'm just going to go give it to him because my life is clearly more privileged than his. And I'm going to chat with him a minute. And I just went over and I handed it to him and I said, "Do you have everything you need?" And he said, "Yeah, I love my cereal." He was really happy about his cereal.
Yeah.
And I said, "Have you called your mom?" and And he said, "Unfortunately, my mom passed away." And I said, "Well, I hope you have people in your life that love and care about you that you could call because they worry about you. You're worthy." And he looked at me and he said, "Thank you so much for taking the time to stop." And now I see him in West Bank, and when I drive by, he waves at me like we're old friends, and I wave back at him, and I feel like it took nothing for me, but I had stopped doing it until your talk. I forgot how important that was. And so I want you to know the impact of you talking about that. And that's why I wanted you to come on the show, because I want other people to consider, how am I treating people that are different than me
Mm.
based
Yeah.
on their economic circumstances? But if I had a neighbor, or the law firm partner at my firm has an alcohol problem, am I treating him differently than that guy sitting outside of Save on Foods? And if you are, you got some looking in your heart to do. And I know I had a little looking in my own heart to do.
Yeah. No, for
Yeah.
sure. Oh, I was so the looking in the heart of it, and thank you for sharing all that, is like was something that was really hard for me because I realized how many times I had done it. And I know that, like, I shared that story about I was on a bus once, when my kid was a baby, and there was this woman on the bus who was high with her kid, and I judged her. I judged her so harshly in my head about had this poor kid with this mom who has this, whatever, who's high on a bus. How irresponsible. Like the next day, literally the next day, I drank society's most glorified drug with a bunch of friends, took a bus, and didn't think twice about it. And neither did anybody in my circle because I was being responsible because I was on the bus. And yet 2 minutes later, I'm able to judge this other lady on East Hastings. And it was moments like this that in sobriety that make me think, wow, the filter I had was wild, our filter that we have
Mm.
sometimes. And then just that we're all the same. Nobody is better or worse than the other.
Yeah.
Your status doesn't matter. Everybody can be addicted to something,
Yeah.
right?
100%. And I was thinking about this destigmatization in so many ways. It just having that conversation got me thinking about um, looking backwards in my life at some situations where I had also stigmatized people for various reasons,
Mm-hmm.
for having lower economic circumstances, or maybe they didn't have as many opportunities in life to learn, or things like that, and or their skill sets were just very different than what I was taught were good. And it really challenged me to look and think, the moment that I'm judging someone, the moment that I have a story about how someone is a little less than me in some way, or at least I'm not as bad as,
Yeah.
then I'm limiting my own potential. I'm limiting my growth, and I'm limiting the most important factor to me, the most important thing we're here to do, and that's connection, to
Mm.
connect with other human beings. And I think that the more we're scared when people are different than us, and we're scared that if we're in proximity of people we perceive to have problems, that those problems might rub off on us or other people. You know what we're really afraid of, Alex? We're afraid that other people will judge us because we judge other people.
Yeah.
Whatever judgment we have for those other people, that's our biggest fear, of other people judging us. So we stay away and we insulate ourselves in privilege.
Yeah. 100%.
And
I
it's
mean,
fucking
it's
gross.
gross and it's crazy. And yeah, I can see now that I just didn't want to be an addict, right? I didn't want to be somebody that people saw and that my own, whatever my own stigma was around addict, right? As
Yeah.
somebody, yeah, I just didn't want to be viewed that way. And now I look at it and I think, oh, that's like, it's ridiculous. Like, it's just silly. And it's unfair to everybody in a way. I mean, and unfair might be the wrong word, but it creates this problem for everyone. It creates a problem for people who are living on the streets and the stigmas that people have towards them. And it also creates a problem because it creates this world where it's okay to where people are still struggling in their fancy houses, drinking out of their fancy glasses, and they're afraid to say, "Hey, I have a problem," because having a problem means that you're just as bad as the guy in the street. But the guy on
Yeah.
the street doesn't have to be just as bad as anything. Like we can just be human beings, you know?
Right. Yeah. Could we stop comparing? Because this is where, you know, this just as bad as this is turning into such a
Mhm.
great theme because it's so powerful. Um, I'm either just as bad as or not as bad as. And I think that when we examine our lives from that perspective, what we really get to is, if I have to do that, if I have to compare myself to others, what I'm lacking is self worth.
Mm,
And so I'm looking externally to measure myself to get worth. But it's a little like chasing your shadow, because you have to compare all the time and reassure yourself that you are okay in the standing. And you'll see a lot of very confident people do this. Confidence and self-worth are not the same thing, right? They're
right.
not the same thing. Like, to be confident, I can be confidence episodic. It's like environmental. I could be confident in an environment of coaching, but if you ask me to go out and coach the Philadelphia Eagles in football, I'd be like, I don't even know how to throw a football. So confidence is situational, but worthiness is, it's comes from within, and it's either there or it's not, and we can hide a lack of worth with confidence in certain skills. But I think that we all have somewhere to look here. When, where in your life are you comparing? Where are you one upping and
Mm,
one downing? Like, oh, she's got a nice Louis Vuitton purse, must be nice. And well, yeah, he's pushing a shopping cart, huh? And like,
yeah.
as soon as we're doing that, what that points to is a lack of self-worth.
Right. Yeah.
And
Totally.
that's the only thing we have control of, is us. And like, confronting our own inner work, our own
Yeah.
inner
Demon.
knows, our inner fears, the delusions and illusions that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a
100%.
delusion. It's an absolute delusion that I'm better than somebody because I'm not under a bridge drinking. I'm
No.
drinking out of a Riddell crystal glass, and it's you know, a nice, some Prosecco in there. Like, as
Yeah,
soon
no,
as
it is
we,
a delusion. It's like it's the same. Same, same.
yeah. Now tell me a little bit about, I love what you're spearheading with Let's Not Sugarcoat It podcast. I want to chat about that because you, like me, have found some freedom in sharing your story. And it's, I see it in you. The more you share it, the more free you get and the brighter your light shines. And I find, for me too, the more I share it, the
Hmm.
more healed I am. And I love to be a catalyst for healing others. But again, you didn't just make it about you. You said, hey, why don't we create a platform for other people to share their stories? So, besides the podcast, tell me about your book and your speaking tour that you're starting.
Oh yeah, so for our podcast, we have this book and speaker series, and it's all about stories that it's basically there's 20 authors, and then they're all gonna have a platform to do a talk, a TEDx style talk. And what we wanted to create is we just really wanted to create a space, because what we found with our podcast was people were coming on and they were sharing vulnerable moments that they'd had, and they felt safe to do it. And we thought this is so powerful. And that in sharing those moments of vulnerability, of moments where people thought they failed, that there was suddenly that freedom that you just said, where they were feeling like they had released this thing they were holding on to, right? And so we just wanted to create more of that. So that's what the speaker series and book series is really about, is just sharing stories of vulnerability, and that through sharing those things that we may have held on to because we were embarrassed or we felt a level of shame, that by sharing them we actually connect, we might inspire others, and we're able to get to the other side of that feeling of shame and find power.
Yeah, on the other side of shame is
Yeah,
power. That's right.
power.
When we have shame, we're hiding because someone else could potentially out us and they own the narrative. And we're always afraid of someone finding out. But when we take the power of our stories and share them, we take back the narrative.
Mhm.
And we in doing so we take back our power. I'm a big advocate of teaching people to share their stories. And I, for one, say if you're going to share your story, share the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Right. And it's so hard. I do love that you say that. I think of you often. And I often, when I share a story, I try to share a part of it I've never shared. And it's hard to do. And I
Yeah.
think of you because you do always say, share and don't hold back and tell the truth. And the
Yeah.
truth can be really ugly and it can feel embarrassing and shameful at times. But those are the moments now where I think, if I feel shame around this, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I said at that talk we just did. I mean, I had never shared with anybody but people in my circle that my kids had to be interviewed by social services. I mean, that was a moment of shame for me.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to say, and sharing it made me feel free of keeping that secret that I felt shamed about. And it really did make me see how privilege had helped me get out of that, and that other people sometimes don't have that. And then I was like, no, we have to talk about this, right? And
Yeah,
sharing.
say more about that
Good.
because I found that really interesting too. How privilege helped you get out of it, and how you examined that really.
Yeah, I mean, so when a violent incident or a domestic incident happens in a household, even if no kid was there to witness it, because there was a child in the household, then social services immediately, if the police are called, has to be informed. And so I needed to be interviewed by social services, my kids needed to be interviewed, and my husband needed to be interviewed by social services. And I have a sister who is a social worker. I mean, she's a counselor now, but she was in child protection in
Mhm.
social services. And I said, what do I do to make this go away? And I was still holding on to my drinking problem. So I don't even think she knew how bad it was. And so she said, you need to show that you're going to deal with your stress in a different way. There's a domestic involved in this. So the social worker wants to get rid of your case as fast as possible. So this is what you need to say. Don't move back in that house because they're going to follow you with a safety plan if you do. And say you're go book a counseling appointment, say you're working on dealing with your stress a different way.
So you had to have the money to go to a counseling
Yeah.
session.
Counseling
You had to
session
have the
and,
contacts and the wherewithal to ask your sister about
yeah,
this. And
and
then
the money
you
to
had
rent a
the
place.
money to rent another place to insulate you from the impact
Yes.
of your actions.
Well, yeah, because if I had gone back to my home, I would have needed a safety plan if I were ever to drink again or when my kids were in the house. I would have
Yeah.
needed a safety plan so that, my husband probably could have said, "Oh, and she's drinking again." All these things, right? And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." So I this isn't a big problem or whatever I was thinking, and I just made it go away. And then I kept thinking afterwards, I think of it often, what if somebody went back to their house and they didn't have the money to go rent another apartment? And you know what? I wasn't ready to quit drinking then, so and so probably might not have been ready to quit drinking too. And then the cycle just continues, right?
Yeah, and then think about like the stigma about they don't have the, maybe they're a little bit lower income and they don't have the means to seek a counselor or to get another place, whatever. The cycle continues, and then us up here on our high hill goes, look at their family, those poor kids. That woman drinks. And, again, we're right back into that stigmatization. The only distinction is privilege.
The only distinction is privilege. It's so true. And my daughter had this friend in the school she originally went to, and the mom, like, she had been she drank. The kids said that sometimes the principal walked her home. I judged her for sure. And that's what happens. Like, we're like, oh, that person has social service following them. Da da da. Social services could have followed me, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just privilege. It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
crazy. And
Yeah.
I know my sister was saying, when I talked to her about this after our talk, she said, I think back on it about so many kids that I've taken away from houses. And I've said, this is unsafe, because that's my job, is to look at it and say, what are the risks? Is this unsafe? Is there a likelihood this person is going to use whatever substance it is again? The kid's going to be around. Violence will happen, blah, 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 all those things. And she said, and I think about it now, I never felt unsafe, she said, in our home growing up. She said, there's so many people I went to and thought, oh, I wonder, like, in that I know that drink a lot. And she's like, I've never had those thoughts, but it's, when you look at it, it's the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember growing up and my dad would be having like a big jam session in our living room on a Wednesday night. He was a Vancouver firefighter, so he worked shift work and then he owned his own business, and all his friends were professional musicians, so they weren't working on a Wednesday. They were at our house playing guitar till 5 in the morning, and we couldn't get any sleep. We're in the other room, and we'd sneak out and get up, and like we're up at all hours of the freaking night. And when I'm 8, like, and there's not an adult there that could drive someone to the hospital if something happened, and you
Yeah.
know,
Oh my
like,
gosh. Totally.
and so exactly, they're the only distinction is that we happen to live in a decent house and my dad had 2 jobs, and so all of that was not deemed unsafe. But if you went to somebody's house now and their kid, we found out their kids are up at all hours of the night because they're having parties, I look back and I think, what a fun childhood I had.
Right. And I
Like,
thought
I
I was
don't think
giving my
anything
kids a
bad of it.
fun childhood, how going to
Totally.
parties with them all the time and taking them, and all the adults are drinking. I
Yeah.
mean, I thought it was fun for them. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so again, it's just perception. Now, when we get to telling the truth, we were speaking about telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. This is also something I love about you, because for those of you who are listening and want to maybe think about sharing your story, people smell bullshit. If you try to hide certain parts of it or spin it or point the finger and blame at all, your story loses power. And it still has power over you. It still owns you. And I love your unabashedness. I love that you're just like, well, I'm just going to share something I haven't shared before, and you don't sugarcoat it.
Thank you. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's what makes you a powerful storyteller. And that's why you're going to make such a huge impact in the world, because you're leading from that place. You're not justifying, rationalizing, or defending. You're examining. And here's the thing about truth: we don't always know the whole truth. A year from now, it's going to look different and there'll be another layer. You
Totally.
know, I'm still, when I spoke at that talk, it's the first time I've really spoken about Steve, my first husband, in any depth in my talks. But I felt it freed me up to some degree. There was like a bit more healing for me around it to speak that
Right.
particular angle of truth.
Yeah. Oh, it's so powerful, speaking anything out in the, that
Yeah.
we've been holding on to. It's a
Yeah.
lot like, too, in your course that I just took with you, that, when we tell the truth, it's like we free ourselves from the poison we've been giving to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Holding on to that thing. And then you talk about it and suddenly it's less scary. It's less, I'm not saying that the thing that happened is less bad, but it's like what the meaning we make about ourselves about it and all of that is less, it holds less of a grip on us.
Well, you just said it's maybe about ourselves not so bad, but what if we took the word bad out? Bad is subjective. What you
Yes.
think is bad and what I think is bad, like little girl's dad across the wrong side of the tracks, bad, mom and dad at the country club, good. Like that's just perception. All
Yeah.
of that's bullshit too. So it's just like our humanity.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, like okay, so I this in my experience of being human, I did some things that led me to less freedom,
Hmm.
and now I find doing these things leads me to more freedom. And when we take the bad and the good, because that's all a construct, and at different times in society those things change. In the
Yes.
1970s, my dad would drink while we were he would have beer on his lap and have me on his lap while he's driving, and that was acceptable.
Right. It was okay. It was allowed.
And
Yeah.
now if someone did that, they're going to prison. So
Yeah.
is it bad? Is it good? Is it like it's none of those things. It is what we say it is. And that layering of the labeling rather is part of what creates the stigmatization. So
Yeah.
you have to look at where does bad even come from? Who told you that this is bad or this is good or this is the way to do it or not? Did you just absorb it from society?
Right.
You got to think for yourself, right? If you want to get free, we have to think for ourselves, which is what you're doing as you're speaking your story. And I think that you're leading a lot more people than you realize. I think that you are causing really important conversations. And I suspect you're only getting warmed up with
Well, thanks.
the impact you're going to have in the world.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah. I hope I have impact. I've been liking doing it. Yeah, I love connecting with people. And I think I spent too many years trying to connect on this surface level of boozing, but there's super big connection in sharing vulnerable stories with people. And I find that, yeah, I love that and I'm not doing it on purpose to say, oh, I say this and someone says, oh, this spoke to me. But I love hearing that feedback when somebody says, you did a talk and I really resonated with that. And then I think, okay, well, here that just connects us as humans on
Yeah.
such a better level, right?
I love that word resonating. It's like we're vibrating on the same frequency. I can hear that pitch that you're, putting out into the world. And it really means to me that someone's heart was touched.
Mm,
And my son has always said, and I know this is a saying in AA and all of that, but like the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection.
right.
And
Yeah.
through our stories, we connect. And where I wanted to sort of steer this is a little bit of a different place. But, my background is in yoga. And if we look back to the yogic teachings 5,000 years ago, in the Upanishads, the rishis or the seers that were sort of the divine beings on earth, they shared ancient wisdom through language. The Sanskrit language was sung. It wasn't spoken. It was sung because we remember, how you can remember every song, every word to a song in the 1980s, but you can't remember why you went to the fridge. It's
Yes.
like songs have that.
That
They
effect.
have that way of being. And stories came out of those songs. And that tradition is in our indigenous culture here in Canada, the stories being passed down and stories through song. And it's the stories that connect us. But in the society we live in now, we hide behind the four walls of our privileged little houses
Hmm.
and we are ashamed of our stories and we get more and more separate. And that's why I think that it's why we get more and more sick as a society, not just with addiction. There's so many we've got anxiety, we've got depression, we've got like all of these things. And I think they're all symptoms of disconnection and storytelling. Us learning to share our voices and share our experiences connects us with others. And we also don't know when that story is the medicine for someone else.
Hmm.
I had a gal once come to a talk of mine, and I didn't even know she was in the audience. And it was 2 years later, she sent me an email and said, "You have no idea how much that meant to me. I had a rift in a relationship that I was with it was with her mom." She said, "I had a rift in my relationship with my mom that was catastrophic. I wasn't speaking to any of my brothers or sisters. My life was miserable. And what you said to me about making other people wrong made a huge difference. And she said, I called my mom and apologized for making her wrong. And we healed our relationship. We had a big cry. And 2 weeks later, my mom had a massive stroke and died.
Wow.
And I was just like, well, we have to speak our
Yeah.
truths, because if one person gets some kind of healing or some kind of freedom, and what if we withheld that? It's like withholding medicine. It's like, I got the cure for diabetes, but you can't have it because
Right.
I'm embarrassed.
I'm just holding on to it.
Just
Yeah.
holding on to it. Yeah, in case somebody judges me for how I share it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We never know the words that we say to people that will impact them. I'm sure everybody listening, yeah, has had a time, right? When
Yeah.
that's happened. I remember even years ago when I was in the hospital, I this doctor had said something to me, and he had said, you're like being like an Olympic athlete, and I'm going to give you the afternoon off so you can just take a breather. And he just gave me permission to stop fighting so hard for just a minute. And
Mhm.
I always remembered that. And we did a talk together a couple years after that. And I said, oh, Dr. Reynolds, when you said this, and he says, Alex, I don't even remember saying that, but I'm so glad that those words I said had such a profound impact on you. And he
Yeah.
said, that was the first time I really realized, yeah, sometimes someone can say something and it just is the medicine or the thing that heals the other person, and they don't even know it. So you're right. We just should share. Or not
Yeah.
should, but we need to.
And you're going to be judged. I got news. Like, you are going to be judged. And in order to share, you have to stop managing people's perceptions of you. And you want to know why I know you're going to judge? Because we judge.
Mm-hmm.
I judge, you judge. I'm still working on it. I'm imperfect when it comes to that. I'm in the process of catching my judgments so that I can interrupt them and be curious. But you are going to be judged. And if you're afraid of judgment and you let that stop you, then other people's judgment owns you.
Yeah. Right. That's funny because I was just talking about this. Mom, I'm sorry if you're listening. She said to me once when I was starting to share my story, she said, I really like what you're doing. I just worry a little bit that it's opening you up for judgment, but I like what you're doing. And I said, good, open it up for
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah. Totally. It's I've been told. I had someone, there's another woman in this town who used to be a yoga teacher. She's also she has kind of a coaching style business, whatever. And she reached out to me one time kind of under the guise of like, I just need to tell you this. I just need to help you with something. I was on a hike with some other yoga teachers and they said like, you're so intense, but don't worry, I had your back. And I was like, first of all, are we 12? Like, do you need to phone me and tell me this?
Yeah.
Second of all, good. Like, so I'm intense. Yeah, fuck yeah, I am. I'm passionate about my life and what I do. And if they don't like my intensity, they don't need to be around it. But also, it's probably more about them than it is about me. And my teacher, Baron, says, if you're not ruffling feathers, you're not doing anything. He's
Mm.
like, if everybody likes you, you're not doing anything. Like,
Yeah, that makes sense.
you
Yeah.
know, you really are going to stir up some controversy if you have an opinion about something, but it's only through those kinds of conversations that we change anything. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. Like, let's talk about, wouldn't it be amazing if the listeners of this podcast get off of this and they start a conversation around their dinner table about where do we stigmatize people as a family? Where are we? Let's put that all out on the table and let's talk about that. And
That
then
would,
there's a ripple in the world. So
yeah,
incredible.
that would be so powerful. Yeah.
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 So, Alex, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me. I have two Instagram accounts. Let's Not Sugarcoat It podcast,
Mhm.
or on the other side of the bottle, and or else, yeah, we can. You can find me on our Let's Not Sugarcoat It podcast website, and I'm gonna make my own website soon, but I don't have that yet.
Beautiful. For those of you who are wondering, Alex is also soon to be a certified coach. She just
Yeah.
finished my 200-hour coaching certification program, which is called Become the Catalyst. And it is, to me, the most extraordinary personal development journey that any human being can take. And it equips people to be able to serve others in a very methodical and powerful way. And Alex has a heart for service, and I can't wait to see what you do with this and what kind of offer you create, because I think you do resonate with a lot of people, and they're going to say, you're the person that I want to talk to about my struggles.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to see where it goes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
having me
much for being here, Alex. I appreciate you. And for those of you who like the show, please share the show. That's how it grows. And if there's someone you think could benefit from hearing this episode, send it to them. Share the medicine. Until next time,
on. Bye.
yay.